I had lived in this house for longer than I could remember. In fact, this house was the beginning of my memory, the foundation of my life, built with Jack, my late husband, back in 1975. Edna Sullivan was my name, though in this house by the lake, it always felt like the house had more claim to me than I ever had to it. When Jack passed 5 years ago, it felt like the walls grew quieter. At first, it was unbearable. The echoes of our laughter, our conversations, even the footsteps we shared, seemed to fade with every passing day. I had never been one to embrace solitude. But after Jack, it became a quiet companion I learned to trust. I would spend hours in the garden we'd tended to together, now just a wild assortment of flowers and memories. The house itself was old but strong, much like our life together had been, steady and enduring, even when we weren't. With each passing year, the house felt more like a sanctuary, a place to cradle the remnants of our years, untouched and undisturbed. But that all changed the day Greg, my son, called with an announcement that seemed so casual, I almost missed its significance. "Mom," he said, "Lauren and the kids and I are moving in for a while. We'll be there in a week." I thought he was joking. I laughed. He didn't. My laugh died when I realized he was serious. At first, I thought maybe it would be okay. After all, Greg and Lauren hadn't visited much over the years. Life, as it often does, had carried us all in different directions. He was busy with work, Lauren with her social circles, and the kids, Emma and Louis, had their own little worlds. But I figured this move was temporary, maybe a couple of weeks, a month at most. I could handle that. But as the days passed, I began to realize this wasn't just a visit. They were here to stay. Greg and Lauren arrived with all their things, boxes, bags, and a sense of urgency that had me scrambling to adjust. The house, which had once felt so expansive and peaceful, suddenly felt crowded. Greg and Lauren quickly set about making changes. The first morning after their arrival, I came down to find Lauren in the kitchen, discarding some of the old pots and pans Jack and I had used for years. "Edna, these are no good anymore," she said, her voice cool and efficient. "You can't cook with things this old." It was a casual statement, but something about it cut through me like a knife. She wasn't asking if I wanted them replaced. She wasn't asking if it was okay to part with them. She was just throwing them out, as if the things I had lived with for decades were no more than clutter. I stood there, feeling small, unsure of what to say. I could feel the weight of her gaze on me, her eyes scanning the room as if it were hers to rearrange. "Don't worry, Edna," she added, as if trying to soften the blow. "We'll get you some new stuff. It'll be better, you'll see." I forced a smile. "That's fine, Lauren." But inside, I was beginning to feel that subtle, creeping erosion of self that had started the moment they arrived. The house, my sanctuary, was no longer mine. It was theirs now, and I was merely a guest in the place I had built, the place where Jack and I had shared our lives. I had always been the one who made decisions, who chose what went where, who took care of the details. But now, I felt like a stranger in my own home, silenced by their constant chatter and their opinions on how things should be. The first few days were uncomfortable but bearable. I found myself slipping into old habits, walking the garden in the morning, taking my time, savoring the quiet. But the house was different now. Their presence was everywhere. And with each passing day, they settled in more comfortably, while I began to shrink into the background. It was Greg who seemed most content with the change. He was always busy, always doing something, moving around with an air of authority that made me feel small. And when Lauren wasn't organizing, cleaning, or making lists, she was watching me closely, as if to ensure I didn't step out of line. It was becoming harder to ignore the tension. The little things piled up, the constant rearranging, the way they spoke over me, as if I wasn't even in the room. It wasn't just the house that was changing, it was my place in it. One evening, I found myself standing at the kitchen counter, trying to prepare a simple dinner when Lauren came in, her arms loaded with groceries. "I picked up some things to refresh the kitchen," she said, placing the bags on the counter with a satisfying thud. "We need to make sure everything is up to date." "Okay," I said quietly, not knowing what else to say. I hadn't realized how much I had relied on the familiar rhythm of my life here until it was disrupted. I thought I was used to being alone, but now, everything felt foreign. The old wooden chairs I had inherited from my mother, the soft quilts on the couch, none of it seemed to belong to me anymore. It belonged to them now. And I was starting to feel like a guest in my own life. Then, the day came that would finally break me. It was a holiday, Thanksgiving, to be exact. I had held on to the hope that, despite all the changes, we could still have a family celebration, that maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment things would shift, that I could reconnect with them in some meaningful way. But when Thanksgiving Day arrived, I found myself alone in my room, listening to the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses from the other side of the house. I had been excluded from the celebration without anyone bothering to even ask. Lauren had invited her friends, her family, and even some distant relatives I'd never met, while I was left behind, shut away in my room, isolated from the family I had built and nurtured for years. I tried to make myself feel better by reminding myself that it was just one holiday, one moment in time. But it wasn't just about Thanksgiving. It was about something deeper, something more painful. I had been replaced. My place in this family, the one I had held so firmly for all these years, was slipping away. That night, after the party had gone on without me, I sat alone at the kitchen table, sipping tea and staring at the half-empty plate of leftovers that had been left behind. It was the first time in weeks that I had felt anything close to peace. But it wasn't the peace I wanted. It was the peace of acceptance, the acceptance that I no longer mattered to them. And that realization hit me like a cold wave. I was no longer a part of my own family. It wasn't just the exclusion from the holiday dinner. That was just the catalyst. What happened next drove the final nail into the coffin of what I once thought was a family. It was just another ordinary morning, or so I thought. I woke up early, as I always did. There was a slight chill in the air, a reminder that the seasons were changing. The house was quiet, and I took my time brewing my tea, savoring the silence. I had always loved these early hours, the time when the world felt still and I could think uninterrupted. It was when I felt closest to Jack, in the silence of a house that had been filled with his laughter for so many years. I was lost in my thoughts when Lauren appeared, her footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. I turned around to see her standing in the doorway, arms crossed, a look of mild irritation on her face. "Edna," she said, her voice sharp, "the fridge is a mess. You've got all this outdated food in here. It's not healthy." I blinked, not sure I heard her correctly. "What are you talking about?" I asked, confused. "I'm talking about all the stuff you're holding on to that you don't even need anymore. Look at this." She opened the fridge door and started pulling out jars and boxes, some of which I had kept for years. "Half of this stuff is expired. You can't just keep everything." I stood there, frozen, as she threw things into the trash with a sense of urgency, as if everything I had kept was simply in the way. I felt a rush of anger and hurt, but I didn't speak. What could I say? She wasn't asking. She wasn't even giving me a chance to explain. "You really should just let go of some of this," she continued, her voice growing colder with every word. "It's not doing you any good. It's clutter." I felt my chest tighten. The word, clutter, rang in my ears. Was that what I had become? Clutter? The thought stung, but I said nothing. I had spent years making this house a home, collecting small pieces of my life, Jack's old cooking tools, the jars of spices we had picked together. But to Lauren, it was just old junk. I couldn't stand there anymore. Without saying a word, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her to continue her purging. As I made my way down the hallway, I could hear the sounds of her continuing, the rustling of bags, the crash of glass breaking. But I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to see it anymore. I went outside to the garden, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. The autumn leaves crunched underfoot as I walked slowly along the winding path, but my mind was far from peaceful. This was my life she was discarding. My memories. My husband's legacy. How had it come to this? I had spent years in this garden, planting seeds with Jack, watching as the flowers bloomed and faded with the seasons. But now, as I stood there, I realized that the garden, much like the house, no longer felt like my own. It felt as though it belonged to them, Greg, Lauren, and their children. I was a guest in my own life, simply passing through, watching as they took everything I had worked for and made it their own. It wasn't just the fridge or the furniture. It was everything. The way they moved in and rearranged everything, the way they spoke to me like I was an inconvenience, like my presence was something to be tolerated rather than cherished. I wasn't the matriarch anymore. I wasn't the woman who had once run this house with Jack at my side. I was a relic, an afterthought. By the time I returned inside, the kitchen was nearly empty. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, but it didn't comfort me the way it used to. I had hoped for a moment of calm, a chance to reset, but I found nothing but emptiness. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty space where the jars had once been. A heavy silence hung in the air. And then it hit me, the full weight of it all. I was no longer important. To them, I was just an obstacle, something to be dealt with, something that didn't matter anymore. That was the moment everything changed. I had been trying to hold on for so long, trying to maintain some semblance of family, some sense of connection. But I had been wrong. It wasn't just my house that was slipping away. It was me. I was the one who no longer mattered. I wasn't even invited to Thanksgiving, and when I was included, it was only as a silent observer, someone who existed only in the background, only when it was convenient. Lauren had made it clear, my presence was not needed. And Greg? He had become a shadow of the son I once knew. He sided with Lauren, no questions asked. He didn't even seem to notice how much I had been hurt. I thought he would stand up for me, at least once. But I was wrong. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep living in a house that no longer felt like mine. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when I was invisible to the people who were supposed to care for me the most. That night, I made a decision. The next day, I hired a lawyer. I needed answers. Was the house mine, or had they found a way to take it from me too? The lawyer assured me that, legally, the house was still mine. There were no loopholes, no hidden clauses. Jack and I had built it together, and it would remain my property until I decided otherwise. And then, I made another decision. I was going to sell the house. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. The house was filled with too many memories, too many reminders of a life that no longer existed. If I stayed, I would only keep breaking apart piece by piece. I wasn't going to let that happen. I wasn't going to let them keep erasing me. So, I sold the house. I didn't tell Greg. I didn't tell Lauren. I made the decision for myself, and I didn't look back. It was time to take control of my own life again. The day the papers were signed, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't that I wanted to leave the house. It wasn't that I didn't cherish the memories Jack and I had made there. It was that I couldn't stay in a place that had become a prison of their making. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their permission. For the first time in years, I felt free. I had no idea where I would go, but I was determined to find a place of my own, a place where I could start over, where I wouldn't feel like a relic of a past life. I would find a way to reclaim my independence, my dignity, and most importantly, my happiness. After the sale went through, I packed a few things, only what I needed. I didn't want to leave with more than I could carry. I couldn't look back at the life I had known because that life was gone, replaced by something unrecognizable, something that didn't include me. It wasn't just a new chapter one was starting. It was an entirely new book, and this time, I was the author. After the sale went through, I found myself standing in the quiet of an empty house, watching the final movers take away the last of my things. The walls, once filled with laughter and memories, now stood bare, echoing with the sounds of emptiness. I couldn't bring myself to feel sad, not anymore. Instead, I felt a sense of finality, a release from the years of holding on to something that no longer served me. The house was gone. But I was still here. I had no idea where I would go after that. The world outside felt vast and unfamiliar. For the first time in years, I was completely on my own, without the anchor of the house to ground me. But I didn't feel lost, not exactly. I felt a stirring inside me, something I hadn't felt in a long time, a kind of hope, a quiet determination. I didn't need Greg's approval. I didn't need Lauren's permission. I had spent far too many years living for others, trying to keep up appearances, trying to hold on to what once was. But now, I was free. Free to create a life for myself, free to be whoever I wanted to be without the weight of their expectations hanging over me. I started looking for a place to live. It didn't have to be big or fancy. It just had to be mine. I wanted a small apartment by the lake, one where I could have my morning tea in peace, where I could sit and read without the constant interruptions of others. I found a little place, not far from where I had lived before, and it felt right from the moment I stepped inside. It was small, but cozy. The view from the window was stunning, just a wide expanse of water, with trees lining the shore, their leaves turning gold with the fall. I signed the lease that same day. I didn't want to waste any more time. It felt like stepping into a new life, a new beginning. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of the world lifting off my shoulders. The apartment wasn't much, but it was mine. I brought in the few belongings I had kept, the old quilt I had made with Jack, a few family photos, a set of books that had always been my escape. There were no grand plans, no promises of adventure. I didn't need them. I just needed peace, a place where I could start over, where I could breathe without feeling like I was being suffocated by the past. I took a few days to settle in, arranging the furniture just so, finding the perfect spot for each item. It felt good, like I was putting pieces of myself back together. But the real change came when I decided to step outside my comfort zone. I had always loved photography, even as a young woman, but it was something I had never made time for in the years I spent raising a family, taking care of the house, and being there for Jack. But now, with all the time in the world, I realized there was no reason not to pursue it. I enrolled in a photography class at a local community center, not knowing what to expect, but feeling a thrill at the idea of learning something new. It wasn't about becoming a professional or making a career out of it. It was about doing something for myself, something that brought me joy. It was about reconnecting with the parts of myself I had neglected for far too long. The first class was intimidating. I was the oldest person there by a good 20 years, but the other students were kind, and the instructor, a young woman named Sarah, was patient and encouraging. As we went through the basics, I felt a sense of wonder stirring in me, like a door opening to a world I had always seen from the outside, but never quite entered. I had spent so many years in the background, but now, I was stepping forward, embracing something that was mine, and mine alone. As the weeks passed, I found myself more and more absorbed in my photography. I started carrying my camera with me everywhere, capturing the world around me, the stillness of the lake in the early morning light, the vibrant colors of the trees in autumn, the quiet beauty of everyday life. Each shot felt like a small victory, a moment where I was truly present, truly living. One day, as I walked along the lake, camera in hand, I saw an elderly woman sitting on a bench, reading a book. She looked up as I approached, and I smiled, pausing for a moment to take in the peaceful scene. She smiled back, and something in her expression made me pause. "Is that your camera?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. "It is," I replied, holding it up. "I'm just learning. Taking a class, actually." She raised an eyebrow in surprise. "A class? At our age?" I chuckled. "I guess I'm a bit behind." She smiled warmly. "No such thing, my dear. It's never too late to start." I felt a warmth in her words, a simple truth that resonated deeply. "I suppose you're right," I said, taking a seat on the bench beside her. "It's funny. I spent so many years doing everything for everyone else. I never thought about what I wanted." The woman nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "It happens. Life has a way of sweeping you along, doesn't it? But here you are now. That's what matters." We sat in silence for a few moments, watching the sunlight dance on the water. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that comes when you're no longer worried about fitting into a mold, no longer concerned with what others think of you. It was freedom, of a sort. The freedom to be yourself, to follow your own path, no matter how long it took to get there. When I left the bench that afternoon, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a feeling that had been absent for far too long. For the first time in years, I felt like I was where I was supposed to be. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. The world was still out there, waiting for me, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to embrace it. With each day that passed, I felt stronger. Photography became my escape, a way to reclaim my creativity and find joy in the little things again. I started taking weekend trips to explore nearby towns, capturing moments of beauty I had never noticed before. The world was a lot bigger than my old house, and I was beginning to see it through new eyes. But it wasn't just photography that began to fill the empty spaces in my life. I started meeting people, kind, interesting people who saw me for who I was, not as an obligation or a relic of the past. They were curious about my life, about the stories I had to tell. It felt good to be seen, to be heard, in a way I hadn't in years. And then one day, as I was sipping tea by the lake, I received a call from Greg. "Mom," he said, his voice tentative. "I've been thinking about everything. I know we haven't been there for you like we should have. I'm sorry. We want to make things right." I was taken aback, not sure how to respond. For so long, I had hoped for this moment, but now that it had arrived, I wasn't sure what I wanted from them anymore. I had spent so many years chasing approval, waiting for them to realize how much I had given. But I had changed. I wasn't that woman anymore. "Thank you, Greg," I said, my voice steady. "But I've come to realize something. I don't need your apology. I don't need your approval. I'm doing just fine on my own." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him processing my words. "Mom, I understand. But we miss you. We want you in our lives. I'm in your life, Greg, I said softly. Just not in the way I used to be. I'm living for myself now. And that's enough. We said our goodbyes, and though the conversation left a lump in my throat, I knew I had made the right decision. I had spent so many years making myself small for them, but now, for the first time in a long time, I was standing tall, proud of who I had become. The days following that conversation with Greg felt both heavy and liberating. I had never imagined I'd reach a place where I could truly let go of the idea of being needed, where I could be at peace with the fact that I had built a life independent of the family I had once devoted everything to. It wasn't that I no longer loved them, but rather that I had learned the importance of loving myself first. The lake became my refuge. It was there, on its quiet banks, that I found moments of clarity and peace. The water shimmered under the light of the morning sun, and I spent hours walking its edges, with nothing but the sound of birds overhead and the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. Each morning, as I sipped my tea by the window, I watched the light shift, the reflections in the water changing as the seasons moved. It was a reminder that life, much like nature, ebbed and flowed. And no matter how much I had once feared change, it had now become a part of my very essence. I had not expected to feel so free. But I did. And, to my surprise, it was an exhilarating kind of freedom. There were no expectations hanging over me anymore. I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. No one was there to make me feel like I was too old, too slow, or too much of a burden. The photography class I had started had blossomed into something more than I had ever imagined. At first, it was a simple escape, a way to fill the long, quiet afternoons with something meaningful. But soon, it became an obsession, in the best way possible. Each class, each outing, felt like a new discovery. I found beauty in the smallest of things, an old barn falling apart in the middle of a field, the frost-kissed leaves of autumn, the soft ripple of a bird's wing as it took flight. One of my classmates, Sylvia, an older woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, noticed how often I lingered over the simplest subjects. "You have an eye for this, Edna," she said one afternoon, after I had captured a particularly moving shot of a family of ducks swimming in a pond. "Most people would overlook it. But you see it. You capture what others miss." I smiled, not used to receiving compliments, but the words warmed me. Sylvia had become a kind of mentor to me, and our conversations after class often stretched long into the evening, discussing everything from art to life's little intricacies. It was with Sylvia that I first felt what it meant to truly connect with someone outside my family. For years, I had felt like an afterthought, but with Sylvia, I was seen, valued for my own unique perspective. It was more than I had ever expected. And as the days turned into weeks, I began to realize that I was no longer the woman who had spent her life appeasing others. I was becoming someone else entirely. A woman who had a voice, a presence, and, for the first time in years, a sense of purpose. Photography, in a way, had given me that. One evening, as I was reviewing the photos I had taken during a recent outing to the countryside, I received another unexpected phone call. This time, it was Lauren. She sounded different, softer, almost hesitant. "Edna," she began, her voice shaky, "I know I haven't been the best daughter-in-law. And I know I hurt you. I'm sorry. Greg told me you're living by the lake now. I wanted to call and check on you. How are you?" I hadn't heard her voice in weeks, and hearing it now stirred something deep inside me, something I wasn't sure I was ready to confront. For so long, I had held on to the hurt of the past, the resentment of how they had treated me. But hearing her apology, genuine as it seemed, made me pause. "I'm fine, Lauren," I said quietly. "Better than fine, actually. I'm finally at peace." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her trying to process what I had said. I'm glad to hear that," she finally replied, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "I miss you, Edna. We all do." I felt a strange tightness in my chest. It wasn't a bad feeling, but it wasn't exactly a good one either. It was complicated. It always had been with them. For years, I had longed for their attention, for their love, and now, when it finally came, I wasn't sure how to respond. "I miss you too," I said, my voice steady. "But I'm not the same woman you used to know. I'm not the woman you think I should be anymore." Lauren didn't say anything for a moment. I could feel the weight of my words sinking in. "I understand," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. I hope we can start over. I know we've had our differences, but I want to make it right, Edna." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "We'll see," I replied gently. "I'm not sure what that looks like right now, Lauren. But I'm open to it, in time." She sighed, and there was a trace of something I couldn't quite name in her voice. "I'll give you space. I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry." And with that, we ended the call. I sat there for a long time afterward, my phone still pressed against my ear, but the silence in the room feeling heavier than anything I had felt in a while. I didn't know if I was ready to let them back in, but I also realized that forgiveness wasn't something I had to offer right away. I could take my time. I had spent so many years giving my energy to them, trying to make everything right for them, that now, I owed it to myself to go at my own pace. That evening, I went back to my photography. I found a photograph of a sunset over the lake that I had taken the previous week, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. It was a stunning shot, and I knew it was the one I wanted to print. I hadn't realized until that moment how much these little moments of solitude were shaping me, how much they were giving me the strength I had long been searching for. I couldn't deny the pull of family. It was a bond that, despite everything, still tugged at my heart. But I had learned that my happiness wasn't tied to their approval, to their version of what my life should be. I was finally learning to live for myself, to make decisions based on my own desires, not out of guilt or obligation. As the days stretched into months, I realized that the most important thing I had reclaimed wasn't my house or my past, it was my sense of self. The woman who had once been swallowed up by the needs of others, the woman who had spent years in the background of her own life, was no more. In her place stood someone stronger, more independent, and, for the first time, unapologetically herself. I didn't know what the future held. Maybe there would be reconciliation with Greg and Lauren. Maybe not. But whatever happened, I knew I would be okay. I had found peace in my own company, and I wasn't willing to lose that again. The next time I looked through my camera lens, I saw the world with new eyes. The quiet beauty of life, the joy in the smallest moments, were mine to capture and appreciate. It was a lesson I had spent a lifetime learning. Sometimes, the most profound changes come when we stop trying to control everything and simply allow ourselves to experience life on our own terms. Months passed, and the space I had carved for myself by the lake began to feel like home in ways I hadn't anticipated. The quiet mornings, the sound of birds chirping, and the steady rhythm of the water outside my window became the soundtrack of my new life. I wasn't alone, not in the way I had feared. I had learned that solitude, when embraced on your own terms, could be a sanctuary rather than a prison. I spent my days exploring, wandering around the small town nearby, meeting new people, and discovering hidden corners I had never noticed before. Each day felt like a small adventure. There were antique shops with old postcards and forgotten treasures, a tiny bookstore with a cat who always seemed to be napping on the counter, and a cafe where the barista knew my name after just a few visits. It was a small, peaceful world, but it was mine. It had taken me so long to get here, and I wasn't going to let go of it. Sylvia continued to be a guiding light. We met regularly for coffee or an afternoon walk along the shore. She had a way of seeing things that made even the most ordinary events seem extraordinary. She would point out the way the sunlight hit the water in a certain spot, or how the trees seemed to dance in the wind, their leaves shimmering like gold coins. To Sylvia, the world was full of beauty if you knew how to look for it, and she had taught me to open my eyes again, to see beyond the surface. I found myself diving deeper into photography, taking my camera on trips to the countryside, capturing the people I met, and learning their stories. I took pictures of the farmers working the land, their hands weathered by years of labor, and of children running through fields, laughing in the freedom of their youth. I was documenting life in all its raw, imperfect beauty. It wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was a way of connecting with the world, a way of saying, I am here, and I see you. One afternoon, as I was capturing the sunset over the lake, I realized something. I wasn't just taking pictures for myself anymore. I was telling the stories of the people I had met, the places I had been, and the moments that had shaped my life. I had become a storyteller in a way I never could have imagined. The photographs, now hanging in my apartment and scattered across my desk, were not just images. They were memories. They were pieces of my new life, fragments of the person I had become. But even in this quiet, peaceful existence, the pull of family still lingered in the back of my mind. I couldn't help but wonder what Greg and Lauren were doing. It had been months since our conversation, and though I had distanced myself from them, I couldn't entirely shake the feeling that something was unfinished between us. I had forgiven them, or at least, I had come to terms with everything that had happened. But there was still a gap a space between us that I wasn't sure how to bridge. One Saturday afternoon, as I was sitting by the lake with my camera resting beside me, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw Greg's name. I had told myself I wasn't ready for this. I had built a life for myself, a life where I was no longer beholden to anyone. But here was my son, reaching out, and a part of me, the part that still cared about him, felt a tug. I took a deep breath before answering. "Hello? Mom," Greg said, his voice tentative. "I've been thinking about you. About us. I know I haven't been the best son, and I've made a lot of mistakes. But I want to make things right. I want us to be a family again." His words, so simple yet full of weight, hit me in a way I wasn't expecting. The years of distance, the silence, all of it came rushing back. And yet, for some reason, I didn't feel the anger or resentment I had once carried. Instead, I felt a kind of weariness, the realization that the past couldn't be undone, but it could be acknowledged. "Greg," I said slowly, "I've spent a long time figuring out who I am without all of that. Without being tied to the past, without living for other people. I've come to a place where I can breathe, and it's a place I've earned, a place I never thought I'd have." There was a silence on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear him trying to process my words. "I know," he said softly. "And I'm not asking for things to go back to how they were. I just want a chance to make up for the time I lost. For the things I didn't say." I took a moment to think. Was I ready to re-enter their world? To open myself up to them again, knowing how much it had hurt the first time? I wasn't sure. But then, as I looked out over the lake, at the way the sunlight was beginning to dip below the horizon, I realized that life wasn't about holding on to the past. It was about moving forward, about taking what you had learned and building something new from it. "I appreciate your honesty, Greg," I said finally, my voice steady. "And I'm open to seeing where things go. But I can't go back to who I was. I can't live for you or for anyone else anymore. I have to live for me." There was a long pause. "I understand, Mom," he said. "I'll respect that. I just hope we can find our way back to each other, in whatever way that looks like." We ended the call after that, and I sat there by the lake for a long time, thinking about everything. About my life before, about the choices I had made, and about the choices I had yet to make. I wasn't sure where my relationship with Greg and Lauren would go, but I knew that I wasn't going to rush it. I had spent so many years letting other people dictate my life, and now, it was time for me to choose what came next. Over the next few weeks, I slowly began to reconnect with Greg. Our conversations were tentative at first, both of us unsure of where to start. We talked about the simple things, his work, the weather, what he and Lauren had been up to, but beneath it all, there was a sense of healing, of slowly mending the fractures between us. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't the same as it once had been. But it was something. And for now, that was enough. At the same time, I threw myself further into my photography. The more I worked with my camera, the more I realized that I had found something deeper than just a hobby. Photography had given me the ability to see the world in a new light. To appreciate its beauty, its messiness, and its impermanence. And that, more than anything, was the greatest gift I could have given myself. The ability to see myself, truly, for the first time. It wasn't just about taking photos anymore. It was about seeing life in all its facets, all its rawness. I began to feel more alive with each shot, more connected to the world around me. In every picture, I found something I had been missing all those years, something that had always been there but that I had failed to notice. I had let my family define who I was for so long. But now, I was defining myself. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, each one bringing me a little further from the past I had tried so hard to leave behind. I didn't have a clear direction anymore, no roadmap to follow. But the more I let go of the things that had bound me, my house, my need for approval, my past, the more I began to trust the process. My life was unfolding in a way I hadn't expected, and for once, I was okay with not knowing what came next. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the world outside felt soft and still. The air was crisp, and I was sitting in my favorite chair by the window, tea in hand, watching the last bits of daylight stretch across the lake. It was these simple moments that had become the most meaningful to me, the ones where I didn't have to be anything other than what I was. Just Edna. No expectations. No roles to play. I had learned that I could fill the silence with something more than just my thoughts. I could fill it with creativity, with peace, and with joy. Something as simple as sitting here, staring out at the lake, was no longer an act of waiting for something to change. It was a moment of appreciation, of being in the present. As the days went on, I found myself becoming more involved with the small community around me. I started frequenting a little bookstore downtown, where the owner, a middle-aged man named Mark, and I would discuss everything from books to photography. He was the first person in this town who had asked me about my work with a genuine interest, and his curiosity sparked something in me. I began sharing my photographs with him, showing him the pieces I had captured of the lake, the people, the countryside. "These are amazing, Edna," Mark said one afternoon as we sat in the cozy back corner of his shop, sipping coffee and flipping through my portfolio. "You've got a real gift. Ever thought of doing more with it?" I had. The thought had crossed my mind many times, but the fear of rejection, of stepping into a world I didn't fully understand, had always held me back. But Mark's words planted a seed, one that began to sprout in my heart. Maybe I could do something with this. Maybe it was time to take a chance on myself. He leaned forward, his eyes bright with excitement. "There's an art gallery opening in town next month. They're looking for local artists to feature. I think you should submit some of your work." The idea seemed so distant, almost foreign. Me? Showing my work in a gallery? I had spent my entire life trying to stay under the radar, avoiding the spotlight, keeping my thoughts and feelings to myself. But there was something in Mark's encouragement that made the idea seem possible, even exciting. What if it was time to take that step? What if it was time to show the world what I had been seeing all these years? I smiled at the thought, but doubt lingered in the back of my mind. Would people care? Would anyone even be interested in the moments I had captured? What if my photographs weren't good enough? But Mark, in his quiet enthusiasm, didn't let me linger in doubt for long. "You've got nothing to lose," he added with a grin. "If it doesn't work out, at least you tried. But I have a feeling this is the start of something for you." The words lingered with me long after I left the bookstore. I couldn't shake the thought of it, of taking that step into the unknown, of showing my work to others, of finally letting someone else see the world I had been living in for so long. There was an undeniable pull in my chest, a kind of magnetic force drawing me forward, even as my mind hesitated. So, over the next few days, I began the process of sorting through my photographs. I chose the ones that resonated with me the most, the moments of stillness, the candid shots of life unfolding, the images that spoke of simplicity and truth. It wasn't an easy decision. Each photograph held a piece of me, a fragment of the journey I had been on. But these were the images that felt like they were ready, that felt like they could stand on their own. There were moments of doubt, of course. What if I wasn't good enough? What if no one cared? But then, I thought back to the quiet moments I had spent by the lake, and I realized that those were the moments that mattered. They didn't need to be validated by anyone else. I had captured them because they were beautiful to me, because they mattered to me. If nothing else, sharing them would be an act of owning my own voice, of declaring that I had a right to be seen, to be heard. I submitted my work to the gallery, my heart racing as I clicked send. It felt like an enormous leap, one that I had never thought I would take. But as I stood there, staring at the computer screen, I felt something shift inside me. I was no longer the woman who had hidden away, who had kept her dreams in the shadows. I was stepping into the light, vulnerable but proud. The weeks that followed were a blur of anticipation and self-doubt. I found myself checking my email constantly, waiting for a response from the gallery. It was agonizing, that waiting, but it was also a test of my newfound resolve. I had come so far. I had found my voice, and now it was time to see if others would hear it. Finally, just as I was beginning to think I hadn't been selected, I received an email. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it. "Dear Edna Sullivan, we are thrilled to inform you that your work has been selected to be featured in our upcoming gallery exhibition. We were deeply moved by your unique perspective and the way you capture the beauty in everyday life. We would be honored to showcase your photographs at our gallery opening next month. Congratulations, and we look forward to seeing you at the event. Sincerely, the gallery team." I read the email 3 times, unsure if it was real. But there it was, in black and white, my work was going to be in a gallery. I could hardly believe it. I felt a rush of emotions, excitement, disbelief, and a deep sense of pride. I had done it. I had stepped into the world I had once feared, and I had been accepted. The weeks leading up to the exhibition were a whirlwind of preparation. I spent days choosing the final pieces, working with the gallery on how they should be displayed, and trying to calm the nerves that had started to creep in. What if no one showed up? What if my work wasn't good enough? The doubts returned, but this time, I didn't let them control me. I had come too far to turn back now. The night of the exhibition, I stood in front of the gallery, feeling the weight of the moment settle on me. The doors were about to open, and my heart raced. I was nervous, yes, but there was something else, something stronger, pride. I had taken this step, and no matter what happened next, I was proud of myself for finally embracing the person I had become. As the doors opened and people began to filter in, I stood back and watched. I had no expectations. This wasn't about recognition or praise. It was about sharing a piece of myself with the world, about showing others what I had seen all these years. And as I watched people admire my photographs, I realized something profound. I had spent so many years feeling invisible, but now, I was seen. And it felt like the most beautiful thing in the world. The night went by in a blur. People came up to me, complimenting my work, asking about the stories behind the photos. I didn't know what to say at first. But then, as the evening wore on, I found myself telling the stories of the moments I had captured, the way the sun looked over the lake at dawn, the laughter of children running through fields, the quiet moments that had defined my life. As the evening drew to a close, I stood alone by the window, looking out at the dark sky. For the first time in years, I felt a deep sense of peace. I had found my place, not in the roles others had assigned me, but in the life I had built for myself. I had learned that it was never too late to begin again, to reclaim the parts of yourself that had been lost. And I knew that, whatever came next, I was ready for it. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, each one bringing me a little further from the past I had tried so hard to leave behind. I didn't have a clear direction anymore, no roadmap to follow. But the more I let go of the things that had bound me, my house, my need for approval, my past, the more I began to trust the process. My life was unfolding in a way I hadn't expected, and for once, I was okay with not knowing what came next. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the world outside felt soft and still. The air was crisp, and I was sitting in my favorite chair by the window, tea in hand, watching the last bits of daylight stretch across the lake. It was these simple moments that had become the most meaningful to me, the ones where I didn't have to be anything other than what I was. Just Edna. No expectations. No roles to play. I had learned that I could fill the silence with something more than just my thoughts. I could fill it with creativity, with peace, and with joy. Something as simple as sitting here, staring out at the lake, was no longer an act of waiting for something to change. It was a moment of appreciation, of being in the present. As the days went on, I found myself becoming more involved with the small community around me. I started frequenting a little bookstore downtown, where the owner, a middle-aged man named Mark, and I would discuss everything from books to photography. He was the first person in this town who had asked me about my work with a genuine interest, and his curiosity sparked something in me. I began sharing my photographs with him, showing him the pieces I had captured of the lake, the people, the countryside. "These are amazing, Edna," Mark said one afternoon as we sat in the cozy back corner of his shop, sipping coffee and flipping through my portfolio. "You've got a real gift. Ever thought of doing more with it?" I had. The thought had crossed my mind many times, but the fear of rejection, of stepping into a world I didn't fully understand, had always held me back. But Mark's words planted a seed, one that began to sprout in my heart. Maybe I could do something with this. Maybe it was time to take a chance on myself. He leaned forward, his eyes bright with excitement. "There's an art gallery opening in town next month. They're looking for local artists to feature. I think you should submit some of your work." The idea seemed so distant, almost foreign. Me? Showing my work in a gallery? I had spent my entire life trying to stay under the radar, avoiding the spotlight, keeping my thoughts and feelings to myself. But there was something in Mark's encouragement that made the idea seem possible, even exciting. What if it was time to take that step? What if it was time to show the world what I had been seeing all these years? I smiled at the thought, but doubt lingered in the back of my mind. Would people care? Would anyone even be interested in the moments I had captured? What if my photographs weren't good enough? But Mark, in his quiet enthusiasm, didn't let me linger in doubt for long. "You've got nothing to lose," he added with a grin. "If it doesn't work out, at least you tried. But I have a feeling this is the start of something for you." The words lingered with me long after I left the bookstore. I couldn't shake the thought of it, of taking that step into the unknown, of showing my work to others, of finally letting someone else see the world I had been living in for so long. There was an undeniable pull in my chest, a kind of magnetic force drawing me forward, even as my mind hesitated. So, over the next few days, I began the process of sorting through my photographs. I chose the ones that resonated with me the most, the moments of stillness, the candid shots of life unfolding, the images that spoke of simplicity and truth. It wasn't an easy decision. Each photograph held a piece of me, a fragment of the journey I had been on. But these were the images that felt like they were ready, that felt like they could stand on their own. There were moments of doubt, of course. What if I wasn't good enough? What if no one cared? But then, I thought back to the quiet moments I had spent by the lake, and I realized that those were the moments that mattered. They didn't need to be validated by anyone else. I had captured them because they were beautiful to me, because they mattered to me. If nothing else, sharing them would be an act of owning my own voice, of declaring that I had a right to be seen, to be heard. I submitted my work to the gallery, my heart racing as I clicked send. It felt like an enormous leap, one that I had never thought I would take. But as I stood there, staring at the computer screen, I felt something shift inside me. I was no longer the woman who had been defined by the roles she played, wife, mother, grandmother. I was no longer the woman who had let fear keep her from living her own life. I was Edna Sullivan, and I had something to offer. The weeks that followed were a blur of anticipation and self-doubt. I found myself checking my email constantly, waiting for a response from the gallery. It was agonizing, that waiting, but it was also a test of my newfound resolve. I had come so far. I had found my voice, and now it was time to see if others would hear it. Finally, just as I was beginning to think I hadn't been selected, I received an email. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it. Dear Edna Sullivan, we are thrilled to inform you that your work has been selected to be featured in our upcoming gallery exhibition. We were deeply moved by your unique perspective and the way you capture the beauty in everyday life. We would be honored to showcase your photographs at our gallery opening next month. Congratulations, and we look forward to seeing you at the event. Sincerely, the gallery team. I read the email 3 times, unsure if it was real. But there it was, in black and white, my work was going to be in a gallery. I could hardly believe it. I felt a rush of emotions, excitement, disbelief, and a deep sense of pride. I had done it. I had stepped into the world I had once feared, and I had been accepted. The weeks leading up to the exhibition were a whirlwind of preparation. I spent days choosing the final pieces, working with the gallery on how they should be displayed, and trying to calm the nerves that had started to creep in. What if no one showed up? What if my work wasn't good enough? The doubts returned, but this time, I didn't let them control me. I had come too far to turn back now. The night of the exhibition, I stood in front of the gallery, feeling the weight of the moment settle on me. The doors were about to open, and my heart raced. I was nervous, yes, but there was something else, something stronger, pride. I had taken this step, and no matter what happened next, I was proud of myself for finally embracing the person I had become. As the doors opened and people began to filter in, I stood back and watched. I had no expectations. This wasn't about recognition or praise. It was about sharing a piece of myself with the world, about showing others what I had seen all these years. And as I watched people admire my photographs, I realized something profound. I had spent so many years feeling invisible, but now, I was seen. And it felt like the most beautiful thing in the world. The night went by in a blur. People came up to me, complimenting my work, asking about the stories behind the photos. I didn't know what to say at first. But then, as the evening wore on, I found myself telling the stories of the moments I had captured, the way the sun looked over the lake at dawn, the laughter of children running through fields, the quiet moments that had defined my life. As the evening drew to a close, I stood alone by the window, looking out at the dark sky. For the first time in years, I felt a deep sense of peace. I had found my place, not in the roles others had assigned me, but in the life I had built for myself. I had learned that it was never too late to begin again, to reclaim the parts of yourself that had been lost. And I knew that, whatever came next, I was ready for it. The gallery exhibition was a turning point for me. The success of it, the validation that came with being seen, wasn't the end of the journey, it was merely the beginning. I thought I might feel some sense of closure, some finality after being part of something so significant. But it only left me with more questions, more curiosity, and a deeper desire to keep going. After the exhibition, the days seemed to stretch out before me like an open road. For the first time in years, I had a sense of direction, even if it wasn't entirely clear where I was headed. I found myself waking up each day with a sense of purpose. It wasn't about the past anymore, about looking back at what was lost, or even about what had been found in the process of rediscovering myself. It was about moving forward, about embracing the possibilities that still lay ahead. I had always thought that once I had found peace with myself, I would have everything I needed. But peace, I had learned, wasn't a destination, it was a process. It was something you carried with you, even in the moments of uncertainty, of fear. I had spent so many years in the past, trying to find peace in the wrong places. But now, I was beginning to understand that peace came from within. It wasn't about waiting for something or someone to change, it was about accepting yourself for who you were, in that moment, without apology. Mark, the bookstore owner, had become a good friend over the past few months. We continued our regular meetings, sharing stories, talking about our creative journeys. He had always encouraged me to think bigger, to push the boundaries of what I was doing. One afternoon, as we sat in his store over coffee, he said something that stuck with me. "You know, Edna," he said, his eyes alight with an idea, "you should think about doing a collection. Not just random shots. Something more thematic. A series that tells a story." A series. The idea hadn't occurred to me. I had always just gone out with my camera and captured whatever spoke to me in the moment. But the thought of telling a story with my photography, creating something cohesive and meaningful, it sparked something deep inside me. It felt like the next step in my creative journey, a challenge I hadn't been ready for until now. I started to think about the kinds of stories I could tell. What would my theme be? What was important enough for me to capture, to share with others? After some quiet contemplation, I realized that I wanted to tell the story of the seasons, of the lake, and of the simple beauty that surrounded me. I had spent so many years thinking of myself as just a woman passing through life. But now, I saw myself as part of something bigger, an observer, a witness to the quiet changes that happen in the world every day. There was beauty in that, and I wanted to share it. The series became my focus. I started early one morning, waking up before the sun to capture the first light hitting the water, the delicate mist rising from the lake. The early mornings were my favorite time of day, when everything felt still and calm, before the world woke up. There was something magical about those moments, a kind of reverence that I wanted to translate through my lens. As I captured the quiet, soft light, I felt connected to something larger than myself. It was like I was honoring the quiet beauty that so many others overlooked. Over the course of the next few weeks, I followed the changing seasons with my camera. Each day, each moment, brought something new. The golden hues of autumn gave way to the crisp, fresh air of winter. The bare branches of the trees were replaced with new buds in the spring. I documented it all, each change, each shift, as the world around me transformed in slow, graceful motion. But it wasn't just nature I was capturing. It was the stories of the people I encountered along the way. I met a woman one afternoon while I was photographing a small park. She was sitting on a bench, watching her grandchildren play. We struck up a conversation, and she told me about her life, her struggles, her triumphs, and the way she had learned to appreciate the small things as she had gotten older. "I used to chase after the big things," she said, laughing softly. "Success, recognition, all that. But now, I find peace in watching my grandkids run through the grass. The little things are where the joy is. Don't forget that." Her words struck me deeply. I had spent so much time chasing after something I couldn't quite grasp, always seeking approval from others, always trying to prove my worth. But now, I realized that the joy was in the quiet moments, the ones that didn't require validation or recognition. The simple act of being present, of appreciating the world for what it was enough. The woman's story was one I knew well, but hearing it from her gave me a new perspective. As I captured her photograph, sitting on the bench, watching her grandchildren, I realized that this was the essence of what I wanted to share through my work. It wasn't about the grand moments, the big milestones. It was about the moments in between, the ones that were easy to overlook. These were the moments that truly mattered. As I worked on my series, I felt a sense of purpose growing within me. I wasn't just capturing pictures anymore. I was telling a story, my story, and the stories of the people I had encountered along the way. I wasn't just taking photographs of nature or people, I was capturing life in all its raw, unpolished beauty. And in doing so, I was capturing my own journey, the process of self-discovery that had taken me years to begin. As the months passed, the series grew. What began as a simple idea, a collection of photographs, turned into something much more profound. It was a reflection of the way I had grown, the way I had come to understand the importance of quiet moments, of simplicity, and of being present in the world around me. When the series was finally completed, I decided to do something I hadn't even considered before. I would exhibit it, not in a gallery this time, but in the community center. I had seen how my first exhibition had brought people together, how it had opened doors for me, and I wanted to share this new chapter with the people who had supported me along the way. It wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about the accolades or praise. It was about giving something back to the place that had become my sanctuary, my home. The night of the exhibition, I stood at the back of the room, watching people wander through the display. It was a different feeling this time, less anxiety, more peace. People asked questions, they commented on the photographs, and I found myself sharing the stories behind each one. I had no expectations, but as I watched the audience respond to the images, I realized that this was what I had been searching for all along. Not the approval of others, but the connection that art can bring, the shared experience, the understanding that we are all part of the same human journey. As the night wore on, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Not for the success of the exhibition, but for the peace I had found in myself. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: I was no longer waiting for something to happen. I was living, truly living, in the way I had always wanted. And that was enough.